are friends!
400 years ago, playwright William Shakespeare predicted the deceptive rise of plastic enabled by oil companies' greenwashing of recycling and the public's acceptance. This famous account is today known as Much Ado About Nothing. With my unparalleled knowledge of both Shakespeare and environmentalism, I've been able to uncover the hidden truth underlying William Shakespeare's famous play, Much Ado About Nothing. While some would contend the play speaks to gender roles during the Renaissance, I was able to decipher a damning account of one of the modern era's most hated and beloved tools, plastic. Now you may be asking yourself, why, after hundreds of years of great literary analysis and several decades studying environmental sustainability, are you the one who is just now learning the truth behind these two seemingly unrelated disciplines? Well, as any high schooler in America today knows, Shakespeare certainly did not write any of his plays with the intention of being forthright. And as any silver-hatted educator can tell you, there exists no great conspiracy in recorded history without a particular veil of obfuscation. To understand the full implications of Shakespeare's foreboding, we'll need to break down the plot, characters, and their modern-day counterparts in the history of plastic. While I'm sure many of you know the dramedy that is Much Ado, for the sake of argument, let's revisit this 17th century Sicilian countryside. Now that we're on the same page, let's begin to uncover the hidden meanings throughout this play, meanings which will shine a light on the current state of plastic in our society. Through an intricate understanding of Shakespeare's work, I've decoded these hidden meanings by identifying what the characters actually represent. For your sake, I'll save you the details of this tedious process.
Neighbors, you are tedious.
First up, we have the easy four, our main characters. Hero and Beatrice are a stand-in for plastic and recycling, while Claudio and Benedick stand in for the public and oil companies. Leonato, Lord of Messina, was a little bit more difficult to uncover, but he represents the environmental organization Greenpeace. Don John, our villain, represents the Society of Plastics Industry, a group with a vested interest in the continuation of plastic. For now, we'll use these 6 characters to examine the events within the story and see how they foretell events in our own recent history, as well as the possible future to come. By the end of this analysis, I hope you'll be able to see the future that Mr. Shakespeare is warning us of.
Don Pedro is approaching!
During World War II, plastic was developed as a lightweight material for various applications in the war, and after our soldiers returned, continued to be developed for various uses throughout society. To organize their interests, several newly formed plastic companies created the Society of Plastic Industry, which was backed by the oil companies from which their products were made.
I am a plain-dealing villain.
It's important we note that, heretofore, the public had only noted of the possibility of recycling, but was yet to be fully married to the idea of it in their everyday living. Also, our connection of plastic to oil companies at the time, while the spark was there, was not made apparent. Plastic itself warned us of our overvaluation of oil companies.
Oh, Lord, it will hang upon him like a disease.
As we are well aware, plastic led to an explosion of single-use products, which, along with other awakenings to environmental damage, led to the 1970 Earth Day protests. Oil companies, upset by the negative image plastics had given them, stormed off in an effort to retain their independence.
I cannot endure my lady tongue!
Meanwhile, SPI was working behind the scenes to bolster recycling's image to the public. This is the first deception. Advertising was used to manipulatively place the responsibility of plastic waste in the hands of the public, and when the public becomes embittered by the 1987 news of the Mobro barge, Greenpeace steps in to glorify recycling as the solution.
Count, take of me my daughter, and with her my fortunes.
Meanwhile, in 1988, the beginnings of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are first noted gathering in the Pacific Ocean. The next year, 1989, Larry Thomas, then head of SPI, in response to a task force set to make recycling work, sends out a memo to the society noting that the image of plastics is falling and recycling may not be the hero that they thought it could be. While the public may have been enamored with recycling, unseen forces were bubbling underneath the surface which threatened the stability of both plastic and recycling. To get ahead of plastic's falling image, in 1990, state policy was enacted to identify aspects of plastic which tie their connection to recyclability. These resin identification codes, along with the advertising aimed at putting plastic in a positive light, draw oil companies ever closer to plastic, solidifying their reliance on one another.
Is humor? No! The world must be peopled!
Because of this, plastics and oil companies have fallen madly in love with one another. To quash the resistance to recycling's inoperability, in 1994, SPI unveils a plan to dramatically increase recycling's efficiency, marketing this to the public as a solution to the continued environmental problem. This is the second deception. Fast forward 20 years later, and the public is once again becoming enraged with the failure of recycling.
She knows the heat of a luxurious bed!
Indeed, the public's reaction this time is one that will not easily be quelled, especially amid the growing concerns of related human activity and its effect on the planet.
How dare you?
Even Greenpeace acknowledges the failure of their previous support of recycling.
Do not live, hero! Do not open thine eyes!
The final straw in this case is found lodged in a marine turtle's nose. The public will have nothing to do with recycling, and at a time when plastic needs oil companies the most, it demands the death of the public.
Kill Claudio.
The death of recycling is announced the world over with China's end to importing foreign plastic waste in 2018. In an effort to win back the public's support, companies involved in plastic production, who previously and seemingly knowingly denied their involvement in the problem, begin reversing their stance, once again trying to get behind a plan which will bolster the image of recycling.
Die to live.
The death of recycling is brought to the attention of the public in the 2020 PBS Frontline documentary, Plastic Wars. The American Chemistry Council, associated with the interests of SPI, asks for forgiveness for the plastic problem by developing a plan to end plastic waste, ensuring 100% recyclability by 2040, and citing infrastructure and education as key components of their initiatives. But yet, we've seen these same lines used before. In the 90s, the message was, recycling can do better. Remember the improved recycling performance promised in 1994? Well, that promise is asked once again of the public, despite the failings of the previous union. Shakespeare even predicts my own endorsement of recycling in 2022, having clearly seen the influence with which I hold over the public.
Here come the Prince and Claudio.
And so it's at this point where we reach the present day. The public is reinvigorated to pursue recycling, but more importantly, oil companies, due to the slow decline of gasoline's image, have found their new union with plastic to continue their reign. And this here is the third and final deception of Much Ado. Unlike the previous deceptions by SPI before it, this one seems to have resulted in the happiness of all of Messina, though. This deception, our continued reliance on plastic, indeed, our continued use of single-use plastic bags, utensils, packaging, and more in our everyday lives. Who maintains this new status quo, especially now that the villainous SPI has been ousted? The answer lies by looking back on the play's true villain, the one orchestrating things from the beginning, the one all readers and scholars of Shakespeare have been blind to for the past 400 years. The true villain is Don Pedro. Let's go back and look at the prince's involvement in the previous actions within the play. From the beginning, we notice the prince's eagerness to unite the public and recycling,
That she is worthy, I know.
even going as far as to woo recycling for the public. Later, having won over recycling for the public, the prince moves on to unite plastic and oil companies.
She were an excellent wife for Benedick.
With the aid of the public, Greenpeace, and their love for recycling, the prince begins moving the pieces into play to establish the connection between the two.
If we can do this, Cupid is no longer an archer, his glory shall be ours.
The prince, knowing oil companies well, even more so than the public or Greenpeace, is able to manufacture the oil companies and plastics' love for one another. Meanwhile, the prince stands by while SPI tries to ruin the marriage of the public to recycling. Knowing his bastard brother well, the prince sees that things will work out in his favor. The prince even plays along, and the antagonism created by the first wedding is what actually brings oil companies and plastic together with the common goal of killing the public. Now, while not explicitly stated in the play, it can be understood that the prince and the friar had prior involvement. And once the friar, as the VP of Sustainability for Chevron, suggests courting back the public with the urgency of recycling's death, the prince's plan is done.
Good Signor Leonato, are you come to meet your trouble? The fashion of the world is to avoid cost, and you encounter it.
Everything has been set in motion to ensure he gets what he wants. The public is back to thinking about recycling, but more specifically, the prince succeeds in giving oil companies, hurt by the image of gas, a new leg to stand on with plastic. In the final moments of the play, before we cut to the merry dancing, which is to be the neoliberal salvation of the world, we see SPI's slow realization at how manipulative the prince has been to make his plan reality. But still the question remains, who is the prince? Who is Don Pedro? Before I reveal that though, let me ask you this. Who is John Galt? My revelation to you, dear sweet public, is that John Galt and Don Pedro are one and the same. For those unaware, John Galt is the mythical figure at the core of Atlas Shrugged. He is a stand-in for the perfect man who will lead society anew to its glorious future. A man motivated by his individual desire to make real his vision for society. A man driven, some would say, by greed. And so it's from this parallel literary analysis through which we get an even deeper understanding of who Don Pedro, the Prince of Aragon, the force that moves the action of the play forward, is. Don Pedro is greed. For it's greed of a fair maiden which drives Claudio to hero. It's greed for convenience which drives our continued use of plastic. And it's greed of a fair lady which drives Benedick to Beatrice. Thus, it's greed which drives oil companies to maintain their hierarchy of power within society. Greed, not necessarily any one person or even group, is what's behind the state of our current affairs. It's in this way that Much Ado becomes more than just a dramatic comedy, but further a warning to us living in the present. The rose-colored glasses with which we view the revelry of excitement is intended to reflect our own innocent but ignorant view that we, in our current hyper-individualistic society, can make do with vague promises and commitments to the environment which may serve to be this planet's undoing. What Shakespeare is trying to tell us is that rather than blindly following the call to sing, hey, Nonny, we instead need to collectively remain steadfast in our individual commitments to improve society and this planet. One way that we can avoid the rose-colored glasses of recycling and other methods of greenwashing is by uniting to fight against single-use plastic in our society. As a resident of a coastal community enamored by the beauty of the Gulf of Mexico, I found the Surfrider organization to be a helpful place to organize my thoughts alongside others who are steadfast in their commitments to improve the planet. Specifically, I'd like to see unnecessary single-use plastic bags phased out of our community and replaced with a new society which embraces bringing their own bags when shopping. What we realize when coming together and studying these things is that our pooled resources enable us to reach our goals more successfully. Had I set on this mission on my own, I would have acted to vilify single-use plastic and sought to have it banned. However, by instead taking stock of the entire story before us, I've been able to see through the combined efforts of others that what is much more effective in reducing single-use plastic bags is the co-implementation of both a ban on single-use plastic bags and a charge on all takeout bags provided in store. The bans obviously reduce single-use plastic, but the charges help to prevent their replacement with thicker plastic that is outside the narrow definition of single-use plastic. By bringing shoppers' attention to the negative effects of all carry-out bags that are newly provided every time someone goes shopping, the charge instead steers them in the direction of bringing their own bag. I'm excited to begin working more with my local organization to see what changes we can accomplish together. In the most famous line of the play, Benedick tells Don Pedro,
Get thee a wife.
Get thee a wife.
but if we were to get inside the head of the prince, we'd see that his response is actually, no, I am well, for I have gotten thee a wife. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed my attempt to weave these two narratives together but felt the connection a bit lacking, then I have a couple of recommendations for you. The first is the PBS Frontline documentary Plastic Wars, which I heavily relied upon for my information about the rise of plastic. If you want an abbreviated version, you can see Climate Town's video. And if you love Shakespeare, you've probably already seen Kenneth Branagh's 1993 Much Ado. But did you know that Joss Whedon, director of The Avengers, also directed a modern telling of Much Ado, released in 2012 and co-starring Agent Coulson? Not as good as Branagh's, but I still enjoyed it. And speaking of movies, if you like talking about them, come join me on Patreon, where each month we'll have a live discussion on a different movie. Thank you to Mrs. Bowell, my 12th grade English teacher, for sparking my interest in literature, and also to the many people who worked on bringing these film adaptations and documentaries together. I hope you think of yourself less this week. Bye for now.